The rain was coming down in sheets that October morning in Salem, Oregon, the kind of relentless downpour that makes you want to stay inside with a warm cup of coffee and watch the world wash clean from your window. I was running late for work, fumbling with my umbrella as I rushed toward my car when I heard it, a sound so faint I almost missed it over the drumming of rain on the pavement. It was crying. Not human crying, but something smaller, more desperate. I stopped, my hand on the car door handle, listening. There it was again, a tiny, plaintive mewing coming from somewhere near the apartment complex's dumpster. My heart immediately sank. Living in Oregon, you see a lot of stray cats, especially in the fall when the weather turns harsh. But something about this sound was different. It wasn't just one voice, it was a chorus of distress. I abandoned my car and followed the sound, my work shoes squelching through puddles as I made my way behind the building. That's when I saw them. 3 tiny balls of wet fur huddled together in a soggy cardboard box that someone had carelessly tossed beside the dumpster. The box was disintegrating in the rain, offering no real protection, and these babies couldn't have been more than 6 weeks old. My breath caught in my throat. They were so small, so vulnerable, their eyes barely open, their tiny mouths open in weak cries for help. One was black with white paws like little socks, another was a tabby with distinctive orange and gray stripes, and the third was entirely gray with the most piercing blue eyes I'd ever seen on such a young cat. "Oh my God," I whispered, dropping to my knees in the mud without caring about my work clothes. "What has someone done to you?" The gray one looked up at me with those stunning blue eyes, and I felt something crack open in my chest. These weren't just any abandoned kittens. They were siblings, clinging to each other in their terror and confusion. They had probably never been separated in their short lives, and now someone had dumped them like garbage, expecting them to fend for themselves in weather that could kill them within hours. I scooped up the deteriorating box, feeling how light they were, how fragile. They barely had the strength to cry anymore, just weak little mews that broke my heart. My phone was already buzzing with missed calls from work, but I didn't care. Nothing else mattered in that moment except getting these babies somewhere warm and safe. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the emergency veterinary clinic on Lancaster Drive, still dripping rainwater, with 3 shivering kittens wrapped in my winter coat. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a woman I'd grown to trust over the years with my previous cat, emerged from the examination room with the expression that was both relieved and concerned. "They're malnourished and dehydrated, but they're fighters," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "The good news is they don't appear to have any serious illnesses. The challenging news is they need intensive care for the next few weeks, feeding every 2 hours, monitoring their temperature, making sure they're gaining weight properly." I nodded, already mentally rearranging my entire life around these 3 tiny creatures. "What are their chances?" "With proper care? Very good. But Emma," she paused, using the gentle tone she reserved for difficult conversations, "I have to ask, are you planning to keep all 3? The question hung in the air like a challenge. I looked down at the kittens, now nestled together in a warm towel on my lap. Even in their weakened state, they instinctively sought each other out, the little black one's paw resting protectively over the tabby, while the gray one pressed close to both of them. "I know what you're thinking," Dr. Martinez continued. "Most people in your situation would keep one and find homes for the others. It's a lot of work, a lot of expense, and a big commitment, but I can see how bonded these 3 are. Separating them now after what they've been through." She didn't need to finish the sentence. I could see it in their tiny faces, in the way they moved as one unit, even in sleep. These kittens had already lost everything once. How could I be the one to tear apart the only family they had left? "I'll take them all," I heard myself saying, the words coming out before my practical mind could talk me out of it. "All 3 of them." Dr. Martinez smiled, but I could see the concern in her eyes. "Emma, that's incredibly generous, but are you sure? 3 cats is a significant responsibility. The feeding schedule alone for the next month will be exhausting. And then there's vaccinations, spaying and neutering, the ongoing costs." I thought about my small 1-bedroom apartment, my modest salary as a graphic designer, my quiet, predictable life that was about to be turned completely upside down. I thought about sleepless nights, vet bills, and the chaos that 3 growing kittens would undoubtedly bring to my carefully organized world. Then I looked down at them again. 3 tiny survivors who had already faced abandonment and nearly death, who had only each other in this frightening world. The gray one opened those remarkable blue eyes and looked directly at me, and I felt that crack in my chest open wider. "I'm sure," I said, my voice stronger now. They stay together. As we left the clinic that afternoon, armed with kitten formula, heating pads, and a detailed care schedule that would govern my life for the foreseeable future, I realized I had just made the most impulsive, potentially life-changing decision I'd ever made. But as I glanced in my rearview mirror at the carrier in my back seat, listening to their soft purring, yes, they were already purring, I knew it was also the most right decision I'd ever made. But what I didn't know then was that this decision would transform not just their lives but mine in ways I could never have imagined. The first week nearly broke me. I'd always considered myself a capable person. I lived independently, held down a demanding job, maintained my apartment, managed my finances. But nothing had prepared me for the reality of caring for 3 infant kittens who needed feeding every 2 hours around the clock. My alarm went off at midnight, 2 a.m., 4 a.m., 6 a.m. Each time I'd stumble to the makeshift nursery I'd set up in my bedroom, a large cardboard box lined with soft blankets and a heating pad set on low. The 3 little ones would wake up mewing, their tiny mouths opening like baby birds, instinctively knowing it was time to eat. I'd named them during that first sleepless night: Shadow for the black one with white paws, Rusty for the orange tabby, and Storm for the gray one with those incredible blue eyes. The names felt right, reflecting their personalities that were already beginning to emerge even at such a young age. Shadow was the cautious one, always the last to approach the bottle but the most persistent once he started eating. Rusty was bold and demanding, often trying to climb out of the box despite being barely able to walk. And Storm was the observer, those piercing eyes seeming to take in everything around her with an intelligence that made me believe she understood far more than any 6-week-old kitten should. Feeding them was an art I had to learn through trial and error. Dr. Martinez had shown me how to hold them, how to angle the bottle, how to stimulate them to help with digestion, something their mother would have done naturally. It was intimate and exhausting work, requiring a gentleness I didn't know I possessed. "Come on, Rusty," I'd whispered during the 3 a.m. feeding as he struggled with the bottle. "I know you're hungry, sweet boy. Just take it slow." My world had shrunk to the size of that cardboard box and the rhythm of their needs. I'd taken a week off work using vacation days I'd been saving for a trip to visit my sister in Colorado. Instead of mountain views and relaxation, I found myself learning the subtle differences in their cries, hunger versus discomfort versus loneliness, and marveling at how they instinctively knew to seek warmth and comfort from each other. The most remarkable thing was watching them sleep. Even as tiny as they were, they arranged themselves in a specific pattern. Shadow always on the outside, as if standing guard, Rusty in the middle stretching his little legs, and Storm curled against Rusty's side. They were like a perfect little puzzle, each piece essential to the whole. By the end of that first week, they'd gained weight and were becoming more active. Their eyes were fully open now, and they were beginning to explore beyond their box, though they never ventured far from each other. I found myself sitting on my bedroom floor for hours, just watching them discover their world. The fascinating texture of carpet, the mysterious rustling sound of paper, the endless entertainment of their own tales. My friends thought I'd lost my mind. Jessica, my closest friend since college, came over on Saturday morning to find me bleary-eyed but beaming, bottle-feeding Storm while Shadow and Rusty played with a shoelace at my feet. "Emma, you look like you haven't slept in days," she said, settling cross-legged beside me, "which, knowing you, you probably haven't." 4 hours last night," I admitted proudly, as if this was a major achievement. "They're starting to go longer between feedings." Jessica picked up Rusty, who immediately began purring, a sound that still amazed me from such tiny bodies. "They're adorable, I'll give you that. But honey, 3 cats? Have you really thought this through? What about when they're bigger? What about traveling? Dating? What guy is going to want to compete with 3 cats for your attention?" I felt a flicker of irritation at her questions, though I knew they came from a place of caring. These were all thoughts that had crossed my mind during those quiet 2 a.m. feeding sessions. My apartment wasn't huge. My salary wasn't enormous. My social life, which had already been pretty limited, was now non-existent. But then Storm finished her bottle and immediately began kneading her tiny paws against my palm, her purr vibrating through her whole little body, and none of those concerns seemed to matter. "Look at them, Jess," I said, gesturing to where Shadow was now grooming Rusty's head with his rough little tongue. How could I separate them? They're family, Jessica was quiet for a moment, watching the kittens interact. "I've never seen you like this," she said finally. "You seem, I don't know, different. Happier, maybe?" I considered this as I watched the three of them play. Was I happier? I was certainly more tired, more worried about vet bills, more aware of how much my life had changed in just 7 days. But there was something else, too. A sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. A feeling of being needed that went beyond professional deadlines and social obligations. That night, as I prepared for the 10 p.m. feeding, I realized Jessica was right about one thing. I was different. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't living just for myself. Every decision I made now had to consider 3 other little lives that depended entirely on me. It should have felt overwhelming, but instead, it felt like coming home to a part of myself I didn't know was missing. As I settled down with the kittens for their nighttime meal, Storm looked up at me with those wise blue eyes, and I could swear she was saying thank you. Not just for the formula and the warm blankets, but for keeping them together, for understanding that some things are more important than convenience or conventional wisdom. "We're going to figure this out together," I whispered to them as they ate. All 4 of us. And as the weeks passed, I began to understand that learning to be a family doesn't happen overnight. It happens one small moment at a time, building trust and love through the simple act of showing up for each other, day after day. By the time spring arrived in Salem, the 3 little kittens I'd rescued from that soggy cardboard box had transformed into distinct individuals with personalities as different as their appearances. My apartment, which had once been a quiet sanctuary of muted colors and carefully arranged furniture, now bore the cheerful chaos of 3 young cats discovering their world. Storm had grown into her name beautifully. Her gray coat had developed silver highlights that caught the light streaming through my living room windows, and those piercing blue eyes seemed to see everything. She was the strategist of the group, always observing before acting, always finding the highest perch from which to survey her domain. I'd come home from work to find her sitting regally on top of my bookshelf, watching her brothers with the patient expression of someone far older than her 4 months. Shadow had become my gentle giant. His black coat was now glossy and thick, those white paws looking like he'd stepped in paint. He was the mediator, always stepping in when Rusty's enthusiasm got the better of him, always the first to comfort when one of them was scared or hurt. If Storm was the brain of the operation, Shadow was definitely the heart, and Rusty was pure mischief wrapped in orange and gray stripes. He was the one who figured out how to open cabinet doors, the one who discovered that plants were excellent for digging, the one who thought my computer keyboard made the most interesting sounds when walked across during important video calls. He was fearless and funny and absolutely exhausting. The dynamics between them fascinated me. They had their own complex social structure, their own rules and rituals that I was only beginning to understand. Every morning, they performed an elaborate greeting ceremony, touching noses and cleaning each other's faces, as if they hadn't seen each other in years instead of hours. They had specific sleeping arrangements that rotated based on some system I couldn't decode. Sometimes Storm was in the middle, sometimes Shadow, but never Rusty, who preferred to stretch out on the edges where he could make quick escapes for midnight adventures. They played together with an intensity that sometimes worried me, until I learned to recognize the difference between real fights and the elaborate wrestling matches that seemed to be essential to their development. Shadow would pin Rusty down with the patience of a big brother, while Storm attacked Shadow's tail with the precision of a small tiger. They communicated in a language of chirps, trills, and body positions that was far more complex than simple meowing. But it was during the quiet moments that I fell most deeply in love with what we'd built together. Evening had become my favorite time of day. After dinner, theirs and mine, they would all settle in the living room for what I'd started calling our family hour. Storm would claim the back of the sofa, her paws tucked neatly beneath her, surveying her kingdom. Shadow would curl up beside me, his purr a steady vibration against my leg, and Rusty would sprawl across my lap, completely relaxed, his orange fur glowing in the lamplight. It was during one of these quiet evenings in early May that I realized how much they'd changed me too. I was scrolling through photos on my phone, something I'd started doing obsessively, documenting every adorable moment, when I came across a picture from 6 months earlier. It was from Jessica's birthday party, and I looked hollow, somehow, smiling, but not genuinely happy, going through the motions of a social life without really engaging. Now, looking at myself in the reflection of my laptop screen as 3 cats dozed around me, I saw someone different, someone more grounded, more present, more purposeful. My life had structure now, but not the rigid, joyless structure of my previous routine. This was structure built around love and responsibility and the simple pleasure of caring for others. My work had even improved. The creative energy I brought to my graphic design projects had intensified, inspired partly by watching my cats explore their world with such curiosity and fearlessness. I'd landed a major client that spring, a local organic food company that wanted fresh, innovative branding, and I knew the confidence I'd gained from successfully raising 3 kittens had translated into professional success as well. "You know," I said to Storm one evening as she supervised my work from her perch on my desk, "you 3 have made me braver." She responded with that slow blink that cat owners learn to interpret as affection, then delicately stepped across my keyboard, adding her own creative input to my design. I laughed, saving my work before she could cause any real damage, and marveled at how natural this all felt now. But it was the health scare in June that really showed me how deep our bond had become. Shadow had been acting lethargic for a couple of days, not eating with his usual enthusiasm, hiding under the bed more than usual. My heart clenched with worry as I made an emergency appointment with Dr. Martinez, visions of worst-case scenarios flooding my mind. The waiting room at the veterinary clinic felt different this time. 6 months earlier, I'd been a woman who'd impulsively rescued 3 kittens. Now I was their guardian, their protector, their family. The weight of responsibility felt heavier and more precious than ever. "It's just a minor respiratory infection," Dr. Martinez assured me after the examination. "Very common in young cats, easily treated with antibiotics. He'll be fine in a week." The relief I felt was overwhelming. As we drove home, Shadow in his carrier and a bag of medication beside me, I realized that these 3 cats had become as essential to my well-being as I was to theirs. The thought of losing any of them was unbearable, not just because I'd grown attached, but because we'd become a unit, a family in the truest sense. That evening, as Shadow rested between his siblings, all 3 of them purring softly, I understood something I'd never grasped before. Love isn't just about the good times, the cute moments, the Instagram-worthy photos. Love is about showing up during the scary times, the uncertain times, the times when all you can do is offer comfort and hope for the best. But as summer approached and my 3 kittens grew into young cats, I had no idea that our biggest test as a family was still ahead of us. The call came on a Thursday afternoon in late July, while I was working at my desk with Storm supervising from her favorite spot on the windowsill. My phone displayed my sister's name, and I almost let it go to voicemail. Sarah and I talked maybe once a month, usually quick check-ins about our parents or holiday plans, but something made me answer. "Emma," her voice was strained, different. "I need to ask you something, and I know it's sudden, but..." My stomach dropped. "What's wrong? Are Mom and Dad okay?" "They're fine. Everyone's fine. It's just, God, this is harder than I thought it would be." She took a shaky breath. "David got the promotion, the one in Denver. We're moving, and we need to be there by September 1st. I felt genuinely happy for her and my brother-in-law. David had been working toward this opportunity for years. "Sarah, that's amazing. Congratulations, you must be so excited." We really are. "But Emma, we can't take Muffin." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Muffin was their elderly golden retriever, 13 years old and arthritic, who'd been part of their family since before their kids were born. The idea of them leaving her behind was unthinkable. "What do you mean you can't take her?" I asked, though I was already beginning to understand. "The apartment complex David's company set us up in temporarily doesn't allow pets over 50 pounds, and Muffin is too old for a cross-country drive, too fragile for flying. The vet said the stress could literally kill her." Sarah's voice cracked. "We've been looking for other options for weeks, but we're running out of time." I closed my eyes, knowing what was coming next. "Would you consider taking her? Just temporarily, maybe for a few months until we can find a permanent place that allows big dogs? I know it's asking a lot, especially with your 3 cats, but you're the only family we have out there, and I trust you more than anyone else with her." I looked around my small apartment, trying to imagine adding a 60-pound dog to the careful ecosystem I'd built with Shadow, Storm, and Rusty. The cats were watching me curiously, as if they could sense the importance of this conversation. "Sarah, I started, then stopped. Tell me about her temperament with cats. She's been around them before. She's too old and tired to chase anything. Honestly, all she does anymore is sleep and eat and follow the kids around. She's the gentlest soul you'll ever meet." I thought about my sister's family, her husband's demanding career, their two young children, the stress of a major move. And I thought about Muffin, who'd given them 13 years of loyalty and love, now facing abandonment through no fault of her own. When would she need to be here? I asked quietly. Next week. Sarah's relief was audible. Oh, Emma, does that mean you'll consider it? That evening I sat on my couch with all three cats arranged around me in their usual evening positions and told them about the conversation. I'd gotten into the habit of talking to them about everything, my work, my worries, my plans. They were surprisingly good listeners. A dog, guys, I said, scratching behind Rusty's ears. A big old sad dog who needs a place to stay. What do you think? Storm fixed me with those knowing blue eyes and gave me one of her slow, thoughtful blinks. Shadow began purring, as if the decision was already made. Rusty, characteristically, seemed more interested in attacking my shoelace than in life-changing conversations. The practical problems were significant. My apartment was small. I'd never had a dog. The cats had never lived with a dog. The additional expenses would strain my budget. And this was supposed to be temporary, but what if Sarah couldn't take Muffin back? What if temporary became permanent? But beneath all the practical concerns was a deeper question. What kind of person had I become? 6 months ago, I might have said no immediately, cited the logical reasons why it wouldn't work, protected my comfortable routine. But these three cats had taught me something about opening your heart even when it's inconvenient, even when it's scary, even when you're not sure you're equipped for what's ahead. I called Sarah back that night. Yes, I said simply. Bring her here. Muffin arrived the following Tuesday in the back of Sarah's SUV, along with a dog bed the size of a small couch, enough food for a month, and a box of toys that looked well-loved and well-chewed. She was smaller than I'd expected, her golden coat faded to white around her muzzle, her brown eyes clouded with cataracts but still warm and intelligent. She's house-trained, obviously, Sarah said, trying not to cry as she helped Muffin out of the car. She takes arthritis medication twice a day with food. She loves to have her ears scratched and she gets anxious during thunderstorms. The goodbye was heartbreaking. Sarah knelt beside Muffin, burying her face in the dog's neck, whispering promises about finding a way to be together again soon. The kids had already said their goodbyes at home, too upset to come along. David stood awkwardly beside the car, checking his watch and trying to be supportive while clearly stressed about their timeline. And then they were gone. And I was standing in my apartment with 3 cats and one very confused, very sad dog. The first few days were challenging in ways I hadn't anticipated. Muffin wasn't aggressive toward the cats, but she was clearly depressed. She barely ate, spent most of her time lying on her bed staring at the door and whimpered softly during the night. The cats, meanwhile, had very different reactions to this large intruder in their territory. Rusty was fascinated and fearless, approaching Muffin with his typical lack of boundaries, trying to play with her tail and sniff her food. Storm maintained her usual cautious distance, observing from high perches and clearly reserving judgment. But it was Shadow who surprised me the most. On the third day, as Muffin lay on her bed looking particularly forlorn, Shadow approached slowly and deliberately. He sniffed her gently, then, to my amazement, curled up beside her, pressing his warm body against her side and beginning to purr loudly. It was as if he understood her sadness and was offering comfort in the only way he knew how. Muffin lifted her head, looked at this small black cat who'd chosen to befriend her, and for the first time since arriving, her tail gave a tiny wag. That moment of connection between Shadow and Muffin was just the beginning of something I never could have predicted, a transformation that would test everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and the capacity of the heart to expand beyond what seems possible. September brought the kind of crisp mornings that make you remember why you love Oregon, but it also brought news that would shake our little family to its core. I was feeding everyone breakfast, a carefully orchestrated routine that had evolved over the past month to accommodate 4 very different dietary needs, when my phone rang. Sarah's name on the caller ID made my stomach clench with anxiety. Emma, I don't know how to tell you this, she began without preamble, her voice thick with tears. The housing situation here has fallen through completely. David's company is restructuring, and the permanent housing allowance they promised has been cut. We found an apartment we can afford, but it's in a complex that doesn't allow pets at all, not even small ones. I set down the cat food cans slowly, watching as Muffin waited patiently for her breakfast, her tail giving that gentle wag she'd developed whenever she saw me preparing her meal. She'd been with us for 6 weeks now, and the transformation had been remarkable. The sad, confused dog who'd arrived in August had become an integral part of our daily routine, a gentle presence who'd somehow taught 3 energetic cats the value of quiet companionship. "What are you saying, Sarah?" I asked, though I already knew. "I'm saying we can't take her back, not next month, not next year, maybe never." Her voice broke completely. "I feel like the worst person in the world. We promised her a temporary separation, and now—" I sank into my kitchen chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what this meant. Temporary had become permanent. The emergency foster situation had become a lifetime commitment. My carefully managed budget would need to accommodate not just 3 cats, but a large dog with ongoing medical needs. My small apartment would need to work not just for a few months, but for whatever years Muffin had left. But as I looked at her, calmly eating her breakfast while Shadow groomed himself nearby and Storm supervised from the counter, I realized the decision had already been made weeks ago, in small moments I hadn't been paying attention to. It had been made when Shadow first chose to comfort her that difficult 3rd day. It had been made when Storm finally deigned to share the sunny spot by the window, all 4 of them arranged in a peaceful line like some impossible peaceable kingdom. It had been made when Rusty discovered that Muffin's ears were the perfect surface for head bonding, and she tolerated his affections with the patience of a grandmother. It had been made when I realized that my evening routine now included checking on 4 different creatures instead of 3, and that it felt completely natural. "It's okay," I told my sister, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "She's family now. Emma, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking, I'm telling you, she stays." The relief in Sarah's voice was overwhelming, but it was tinged with guilt and gratitude that made me understand what a burden she'd been carrying. We talked for another hour about logistics, transferring veterinary records, updating microchip information, the legal paperwork that would make Muffin officially mine. When I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, looking at my unlikely family. 4 animals who'd come to me through different circumstances. 3 as a package deal I couldn't bear to separate. 1 as a temporary favor that had become permanent love. They represented every impulsive, impractical, financially questionable decision I'd made in the past year. They also represented the best parts of who I was becoming. But the real test came 2 weeks later, when Muffin's arthritis flared badly during an early October cold snap. I came home from work to find her unable to get up from her bed, whimpering softly whenever she tried to move. The cats were all nearby, as if they'd been keeping vigil, their usual playful energy subdued by concern for their adopted pack member. The emergency vet visit cost $800 I didn't really have. The new pain management protocol would add $60 a month to my already stretched budget. Dr. Martinez was gentle but direct about the reality of caring for an elderly dog. "Her quality of life is still good," she assured me as we discussed treatment options. "But Emma, you need to be prepared for the fact that this is going to get harder. The medications will need adjusting. The episodes might become more frequent. Are you sure you're ready for what's ahead?" Driving home with Muffin, heavily sedated in the back seat and a bag of new medications beside me, I did the math. The additional expenses would mean no eating out, no unnecessary purchases, no emergency fund for months. It would mean turning down social invitations because I couldn't afford them, skipping the small luxuries that made life easier. But when I carried Muffin into the apartment and helped her settle onto her bed, when Shadow immediately took his place beside her and began purring his healing purr, when Storm descended from her perch to sit nearby like a small gray guardian, when Rusty gently touched his nose to hers as if checking on her condition, I knew that math didn't matter. That night, as I gave Muffin her new medications and arranged her bed with extra cushions for comfort, I thought about the person I'd been a year ago. Someone who made decisions based on logical analysis, who avoided complications, who kept her life manageable and predictable. That person wouldn't recognize the woman sitting on the floor of a small apartment, surrounded by 4 animals who depended on her completely, facing the reality that love sometimes means choosing the hard path because it's the right one. The hardest part wasn't the money or the logistics or even the worry about Muffin's health. The hardest part was realizing that I'd stumbled into the kind of life I'd always wanted but never believed I deserved. Messy, unpredictable, full of responsibility and joy and heartbreak all tangled together. As I settled into bed that night with Rusty sprawled across my feet, Storm curled against my shoulder, Shadow purring beside my pillow, and Muffin's gentle breathing from her bed nearby, I understood something profound about the nature of family. You don't choose family because it's convenient or practical or financially sensible. You choose family because some connections transcend logic, because some bonds are worth protecting even when they turn your life upside down, because some love is too important to calculate. But as autumn deepened and Muffin's health became more fragile, I had no idea that our family was about to face its greatest test yet, one that would force me to confront the hardest truth about loving something completely. Sometimes love means knowing when to let go. Winter came early to Salem that year, bringing with it a series of ice storms that kept us all inside for days at a time. But the cold outside was nothing compared to the chill I felt watching Muffin struggle with increasing pain and mobility issues. Despite the medications, despite the heated bed I'd bought for her, despite the ramp I'd constructed to help her navigate the single step between my kitchen and living room, she was declining. It had been 4 months since Sarah's call, 4 months since I'd officially become Muffin's guardian. In that time, I'd learned the subtle language of an aging dog, the way she moved more slowly on damp days, the soft groans when she shifted positions, the cloudy confusion that sometimes crossed her eyes when she woke from deep sleep. The cats had adapted beautifully to her limitations. Rusty had learned not to dart between her legs when she was walking. Storm had taken to sitting near her food bowl during meals, as if standing guard. And Shadow had become her constant companion, rarely leaving her side for more than a few minutes. But it was Shadow's behavior that first alerted me to how serious things were becoming. I noticed it on a Tuesday morning in January. Shadow, who usually greeted me with enthusiastic head bonding and demands for breakfast, instead stayed curled against Muffin's side, his yellow eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made my heart race. When I called his name, he acknowledged me with just the slightest flick of his ear but didn't move. Muffin was breathing but shallowly. Her usual eager response to the sound of food preparation was absent. When I knelt beside her bed and gently stroked her head, she opened her eyes but didn't lift her head to greet me as she normally would. "Hey, sweet girl," I whispered, running my fingers along her soft ears. "How are you feeling today?" She managed a weak tail wag, but the effort seemed to exhaust her. "Dr. Martinez fit us in that afternoon for an emergency appointment. The examination was thorough but gentle, and I could see in her eyes that the news wasn't going to be good even before she spoke. Her pain levels have increased significantly," she said quietly, settling across from me in the consultation room while Muffin dozed on the examination table. "The arthritis has progressed to the point where medication alone isn't providing adequate relief. Her kidneys are also showing signs of strain from the long-term pain management drugs." I felt the room tilt slightly. "What does that mean? Are there other treatments we can try? We can adjust medications, try some alternative therapies. But Emma, I need to be honest with you about what we're looking at. Muffin is 13 years old. She's lived a long, full life, but her body is wearing out. We're reaching the point where we need to start thinking about quality of life rather than quantity of time." The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked at Muffin, sleeping peacefully on the examination table, and tried to imagine my life without her gentle presence. It seemed impossible. She'd become so integral to our family dynamic, so essential to the rhythm of our days. "How will I know?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How will I know when—" "You'll know," Dr. Martinez said gently. "Dogs are remarkably good at telling us when they're ready. The question is whether we're brave enough to listen." The drive home was the longest of my life. Muffin dozed in the back seat, occasionally lifting her head to look out the window at the familiar streets of our neighborhood. When we arrived at the apartment, I helped her out of the car and up the stairs, noting how much effort each step required. The cats were waiting at the door, as they always were when we returned from vet visits. But this time, their greeting was subdued. They seemed to sense that something had changed, that the news we'd received had shifted something fundamental in our little world. That evening, I sat on the floor beside Muffin's bed, watching her sleep while the cats arranged themselves around us in protective positions. I thought about the day she'd arrived, confused and grieving for the family that had to leave her behind. I thought about all the small moments that had built our bond. The first time she'd wagged her tail at seeing me, the way she'd learned to coexist peacefully with 3 energetic cats, the comfort she seemed to find in Shadow's constant companionship. I thought about love and what it really means to care for someone. Over the next few weeks, I watched her carefully, looking for signs of joy, moments of comfort, evidence that her life still held more pleasure than pain. Some days were better than others. On good days, she'd manage short walks around the block, enjoy her meals, even play gently with a favorite toy. On bad days, she struggled to stand, barely ate, and spent long hours staring into space with an expression I could only describe as weary. The cats seemed to understand what was happening before I did. Shadow rarely left her side now, his purring becoming a constant healing vibration against her body. Storm had taken to bringing Muffin small offerings, a favorite toy mouse, a particularly interesting leaf that had blown onto the balcony. Even Rusty, usually the most energetic and demanding of the three, had gentled his behavior around her, approaching slowly and touching her softly with his nose. It was Muffin herself who finally told me it was time. On a surprisingly warm February morning, I woke to find her standing beside my bed, something that hadn't happened in weeks. She was looking at me directly, and in her cloudy brown eyes, I saw something I'd never seen before, a clear, unmistakable message. She was saying goodbye. I spent that last day with her in the sunny spot by the living room window, all four of us together. The cats seemed to understand the solemnity of the moment, staying close but quiet. I told her about all the joy she'd brought to our lives, about how grateful I was that Sarah had trusted me with her care, about how much she'd taught us all about patience and gentleness and the way love can grow in the most unexpected circumstances. As the afternoon light faded and Dr. Martinez arrived for our final appointment, I held Muffin close and whispered a promise I intended to keep, that loving someone completely means honoring their needs even when it breaks your heart, and that the family she'd helped create would carry her memory forward in everything we did. 6 months have passed since we said goodbye to Muffin, and I'm still learning how to navigate a world that feels both emptier and somehow more precious because of the time we shared with her. The apartment is quieter now. The rhythm of our days shifted to accommodate 3 instead of 4, but her presence lingers in ways I never expected. Her bed is still in its spot by the window, and Shadow still spends part of each day there, as if maintaining a vigil for his old friend. Sometimes I catch Storm sitting in the sunny patch where Muffin used to rest, her gray coat catching the light the same way Muffin's golden fur once did. Even Rusty, who's never been one for sentiment, occasionally carries his toys to that corner of the room, as if leaving offerings for someone who's no longer there to appreciate them. The grief surprised me with its complexity. I'd expected sadness, but I hadn't anticipated the way loss would deepen my appreciation for what remains. Every purr seems more precious now, every playful moment more worth celebrating. I find myself taking more photos, paying closer attention to the small rituals that make up our days, understanding in a visceral way that time with those we love is always more finite than we want to believe. But something else has emerged from that difficult goodbye, a clarity about what really matters and a confidence in my ability to make hard decisions with love rather than fear. It was that clarity that led to my call to Dr. Martinez's office last month. I've been thinking, I told her during our appointment, about Muffin, about what she taught us. And I keep coming back to something you said once, about how there are always animals who need homes, animals whose situations are complicated or challenging. Dr. Martinez leaned forward with interest. What are you thinking, Emma? I'm thinking that maybe Muffin wasn't the exception. Maybe she was showing me what's possible when you're willing to take on the ones that other people might consider too difficult, too expensive, too much work. She smiled, and I could see understanding dawn in her eyes. You want to foster senior animals. I want to be the person who says yes when others have to say no, the temporary home that might become permanent, the backup plan when families face impossible choices. A week later, Dr. Martinez called with a situation. An elderly tabby named Winston, whose owner had passed away, whose family couldn't take him because of allergies, whose age and minor health issues made him unlikely to be adopted quickly from the shelter. He's 9 years old, diabetic but stable on medication, and according to his previous vet records, good with other cats, she explained. He's not an emergency. The family is willing to surrender him to the shelter. But you know how it is for senior cats there. I looked around my apartment, now spacious enough again for another resident. Shadow was napping in a patch of sunlight. Storm was perched regally on her favorite bookshelf, and Rusty was engaged in his eternal battle with a feather toy. They'd adapted to Muffin's arrival, grown to love her, mourned her loss, and moved forward. They'd shown me that love isn't a finite resource. It expands to accommodate whoever needs it. When can I meet him? I asked. Winston arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. A magnificent orange tabby with wise green eyes and a calm dignity that reminded me immediately of Muffin. He was cautious but not fearful, curious about his new environment but respectful of the established residents. Within hours, he'd found a sunny corner to call his own, and was purring contentedly as I explained his medication schedule to him. The cat's reactions were fascinating to watch. Storm observed from a distance for exactly 3 days before approaching him with a formal nose touch that seemed to constitute official acceptance. Rusty was immediately interested in this new potential playmate, though Winston's response to energetic pouncing was more tolerant amusement than enthusiastic participation. And Shadow walked up to Winston on that first day and began grooming his head, as if welcoming him to a family that understood the value of kindness to newcomers. That night, as I settled into bed with my usual crew arranged around me, plus Winston, who'd claimed the foot of the bed as his preferred sleeping spot, I felt something I'd been missing since Muffin's death. The satisfaction of being exactly where I was meant to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. My life looks nothing like I thought it would 2 years ago. My apartment houses 4 cats instead of being a peaceful sanctuary for 1 person. My budget is carefully managed around vet bills and prescription foods. My social calendar revolves around medication schedules and the needs of elderly animals. My heart has been broken by loss and expanded by love more times than I can count. It's also the most meaningful life I've ever lived. Last week, Jessica stopped by for our monthly coffee date, something we now do at my place since leaving 4 cats alone for extended periods isn't practical. She settled into my armchair while Winston investigated her purse with the careful attention of a security specialist, and Storm supervised from the bookshelf. "You know," she said, scratching behind Rusty's ears as he demonstrated his most impressive purr, "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For thinking you'd lost your mind when you took in those 3 kittens. For all the practical concerns and logical arguments about why it was too much." She gestured around the room, where all 4 cats were engaged in various afternoon activities. "I couldn't see what you were building here." I followed her gaze, taking in the scene. Shadow and Winston sharing the sunny spot by the window, Storm keeping watch from her high perch, Rusty entertaining himself with a catnip mouse that had definitely seen better days. The apartment was covered in cat fur, scattered with toys, slightly chaotic and absolutely perfect. I couldn't see it either at first, I admitted. I just knew I couldn't separate those 3 kittens. Everything else happened one decision at a time. "It's more than just the animals, though," Jessica said thoughtfully. "You're different, more confident, more purposeful, like you finally found what you're supposed to be doing." As evening approaches now and I prepare for our nightly family time, 4 cats arranged around me in the living room, each in their preferred spot, the soft sounds of purring creating a peaceful soundtrack to my reading, I think about that conversation, about purpose and how sometimes it finds you in the most unexpected ways. I think about 3 tiny kittens in a soggy cardboard box, about a sad golden retriever who needed a place to stay, about an elderly tabby whose family couldn't keep him. I think about all the ways love multiplies when you give it permission to grow, all the ways a heart can expand to accommodate whatever life brings to your door. Tomorrow, Dr. Martinez might call with another situation, another animal whose circumstances are complicated, whose needs might be challenging, whose story might become part of our ongoing narrative of second chances and unexpected families. And if she does, I'll listen to the details, look around at my unlikely household and probably say yes, because I've learned something important in these past 2 years. The best decisions aren't always the practical ones. Sometimes the best decisions are the ones that require you to trust that love will find a way to make everything work, that families can be built from the most unlikely combinations, and that opening your heart to one needy creature will inevitably lead to opening it to others. As I turn off the lights and head to bed, followed by my faithful procession of 4 cats who've learned that nighttime means everyone migrates to the bedroom together, I smile at the gentle chaos that my life has become. This is what happiness looks like, I realize. Not the absence of challenge or uncertainty, but the presence of love that's worth whatever complications it brings. And in the morning, we'll all wake up together and start another day of being family, in all its messy, imperfect, absolutely beautiful reality. Because sometimes the most profound changes in our lives come not from the big decisions we plan for, but from the small moments when we choose love over logic, when we say yes instead of no, when we trust that our hearts are big enough to hold whatever needs holding. And in those moments we discover that the life we never planned might just be the life we were always meant to live.